The Courage of the Truth, The Courage of the Truth, lectures by Michel Foucault, 1983-84 at the College of France. Lecture 4 given on 22nd February 1984, the second hour. First question: how is this game revealed and accepted? You know that in some of Plato's dialogues, it is almost a general rule that a certain point, Socrates' method is presented, outlined and defined in some of its characteristics, so that the game is never invisible to the reader or unknown to the participants or those who are induced to play it. Okay, so first question: how is this game revealed and accepted? You know that in some of Plato's dialogues, it is almost a general rule that at a certain point, Socrates' method is presented, outlined, and defined in some of its characteristics, so that the game is never invisible to the reader or unknown to the participants or those who are induced to play it. They are always told something about this game, but on the one hand, this description of the Socratic game is very often given by Socrates himself, and not by those who will be, as it were, partners and victims in this game. And on the other hand, the interlocutors frequently, if not always, resist when they become aware of the game into which they have been drawn. At any rate, as you well know, this is what happens when characters like Protagoras, Gorgias, Callicles, and Thrasymachus. Here, however, we have something very interesting. First of all, at least one of the partners is in the discussion is fully aware of who Socrates is, what he does, and what is special about him. Secondly, not only does he know about Socrates and agree to his game, but the other, Lash, who does not know him, also agrees and enters readily and willingly into the Parrhesiastic game which is about to take place. This acceptance of the Parrhesiastic game by those who will be its partners, its targets, and to a certain extent, its happy and consenting victims is very clearly indicated at the point at which Socrates intervenes. Socrates actually says, and gets it agreed, that he will ask questions to which the others will have to reply. We still think that we are in the domain of competence, and that Socrates will say, "Who are your teachers?" or anyway, "How were you trained in courage, and what works of military ability can authenticate your contribution and the views you give?" But just after Socrates has proposed this, Nicias intervenes and says, "Don't think that this is how things will proceed. I know Socrates, and I know perfectly well what he will do. I am well aware of what happens when one belongs to the intimate group and usual company of those who discourse with Socrates." He immediately says that he agrees to the game, that he is used to it, and that he enjoys being in Socrates' group. In the event today, he says, "I am not opposed to Socrates discussing with us in the way he likes." To this prior undertaking by Nicias, based on his knowledge of Socrates and the benevolence and friendship he feels for him, his familiarity with him, Lasch adds his own agreement. He does not know Socrates well, and he is not at all accustomed to his mode of discoursing. But in the end, he agrees, for reasons which we shall see shortly, to all the questions Socrates would like to put to him and any possible changes he may impose on the dialogue. And if, unlike Nicias, he does not know exactly how things will proceed, he agrees resolutely to the experiment. "He has my good will. Yes, I consent. And a bit later, I invite you, Socrates, to teach me." He ends this intervention prior to the discussion by saying, "So speak freely, say what you like, without consideration for my age. We have here the Parrhesiastic pact par excellence. One will speak frankly, freely, saying all that he has to say in the form that he likes. As for the others, they will not react, as is so often the case in the political domain or before someone speaking frankly, by getting annoyed, taking offense, becoming angry, and possibly even punishing the person thought to be abusing the use of paresia. There is none of this. Here there is a good, wholly positive game of paresia, in which Socrates' courage will be repaid with the courage of those who accept his paresia. The pact is sealed, full, and I would say it is never revoked. We are dealing with the propitious form of paresia. Second question. Now that we know that the two main interlocutors are agreed, what will happen? And what game? To which Nicias agrees because he is familiar with it, and to which Lasch, with his courage, also agrees. Will Socrates play? It is, of course, Nicias, as someone who knows Socrates, who will set out this Parrhesiastic game. This is what he says to Lysimachus. "Because it seems to me that you do not know that if you belong to the intimate group and usual company of those who discourse with Socrates, whatever the subject you start with, you are forced to let yourself be drawn by the discussion into giving an account of yourself, of the kind of life you lead now and have led in the past. And when you have reached this point, Socrates will not let you go before he has well and truly sifted everything. I am used to this character and know that one cannot avoid being treated in this way. And I know that I will not escape now, because I enjoy Lysimachus, being in his company, and I find no harm in being reminded of the good or bad things I may have done or still do. I consider that by undergoing this test, one becomes more prudent regarding the future, if one is willing, according to Solon's precept, to learn throughout one's life, and not think that old age of itself will bring wisdom. To be examined by Socrates is not new for me or unpleasant. I have known for a long time that with Socrates, not only young people would be questioned, but also ourselves. So I repeat, for my part, I am not opposed to Socrates discussing with us in the way he likes. So, you have the Parrhesiastic Pact, to which Nicias returns a number of times, and at the same time, a description of what will happen. What will happen? Well, this is the hallmark of all Socratic parrhesia and its veridiction. Whatever subject you start with Socrates it is necessary that things take place in the following way. Socrates won't let go until his interlocutor has been led as by the hand, taken around to the point where he can give an account of himself. This quotation is obviously very important. Basically, we are still very close, apparently, if we do not look at it closely, to what was asked shortly before when, having moved from the political to the technical scene, Socrates said, "It's all very well to say we are competent and to be consulted as such, but we must still be able to give an account of our competence and say who our teachers were and what works we have actually performed. It seems then that we are in court. It is still a question of giving an account of oneself. But, in fact, something quite different is involved, and this is clearly demonstrated by the dialogue's development. In actual fact, giving an account of oneself does not involve saying who one's teacher is and what works one has performed. This Socratic parrhesia does not consist in questioning someone on his antecedents, as it were, in the lineage of tradition which enables knowledge to be handed down, nor does it consist in questioning him downstream, as it were, on the works he has performed thanks to his expertise. He will be asked to give an account of himself, that is to say, to show the relationship between himself and logos, or reason. How do things stand with you and logos? Can you justify yourself? Can you give the logos of yourself? It is not a question of competence. It is not a question of technique. It is not a question of teachers or of works. Of what is it a question? It is a question, and the text says this a bit further on, of the way in which one lives. Now compare this, if you like, with, on the one hand, what happened previously, and also with the Alcibiades. In the Alcibiades, you had the problem. Who is this oneself to which one must attend? Here, one has to give an account of oneself, but who is this oneself? What domain must be covered by this giving an account of oneself? It is not the soul, but the way in which one lives, how you live now, and also how you have lived in the past. It is this domain of existence, of the mode of existence, of the tropos of life, on which Socrates' discourse in Paresia will focus. So it is neither the chain of rationality, as in technical teaching, nor the soul's ontological mode of being, but the style of life, the way of living, the very form that one gives life to. Second, you can see also that what is involved is in this giving an account of oneself is not, as when just before it was a question of technique, justifying a competence which gives one authority, but of submitting one's life to what he calls a touchstone, a test, which enables one to distinguish between the good and bad one has done in life. There is the verb basaniztai, which derives from the word basanos, touchstone. This notion of sifting, of the operation by which the touchstone divides things and enables one to distinguish between what is and is not gold, between what is and is not good, is a very important notion in all of Socratic practice as Plato defines it. In the Gorgias, at a crucial point in the long dialogue between Socrates and Callicles, Socrates offers a sort of possible parrhesiastic pact to Callicles. In this pact, Socrates puts things in a way to make it seem that Callicles will be a touchstone for him, whereas, of course, the opposite will be the case. Here it is indeed the opposite, since Socrates is the basanos, touchstone, and by rubbing against him, through confrontation with him, one will be able to distinguish between what is and is not good in one's life. This notion of basanos is also employed in a political sense in Book 7 of the Republic and in the Statesman, where he says that it is important for the constitution of the city to test the people who will belong to it, to submit them to the touchstone so as to be able to distinguish those who are good from those who are bad, those who can be integrated into the city's fabric from those who must be rejected. So we have here this was, and the important element that I especially wanted to hold on to today, the emergence of life, of the mode of life as the object of Socratic parrhesia and discourse, of life in relation to which it is necessary to carry out an operation which will be a test, a testing, sifting. Life must be submitted to a touchstone in order to make an exact division between what is and is not good in what one does, what one is, in how one lives. I forgot something, which is that it is not a question of testing or forming this mode of life once and for all in one's youth, but Nicias emphasizes this, and it is very important. This principle of the test of life should be followed throughout life. This recalls, you remember, Solon's statement that one should learn throughout one's life. One should undergo this Socratic test even when old. Nicias, who is of a certain age at the time of the dialogue, agrees to undergo the Socratic test. Now, unlike technical competence, which is acquired once and for all in one's life, and can subsequently be employed, the Socratic test is something which one has to repeat and profit from throughout one's life as the organizing and formative principle of one's mode of life. You can see that what is involved here, therefore, is the Constitution, the definition of a particular kind of parrhesiastic practice, of a particular kind of veridiction, which is far removed from that of a teacher passing on technical knowledge to those he teaches. This veridiction involves establishing a particular kind of relationship to Socrates, which supports the testing and examination of life throughout life. The first question was, how was this parrhesia accepted? The second, in what does it consist? To what is it related? What is its domain of application? Answer, the mode of life. And now, the third question, what authorizes Socrates to employ a method with regard to everyone and anyone? What authorized him already to have employed it so often with Nicias, and to employ it now with Nicias and Lash? It is Lash who replies to this question. Nicias described what is involved in Socrates' parrhesia, but it is Lash who does not know Socrates, however, either as a dialectician or as a man of discourse, who explains why Socrates must be given the possibility of employing his discourse in this way. As for discoursing, Lash says, my case is simple, or rather double. I give the impression of sometimes loving and sometimes hating discourses. When I hear a man, who is truly a man, and worthy of his words, discoursing on virtue or some knowledge, I experience profound joy contemplating the affinity and harmony in the display I am offered. In my view, such a man is the ideal musician, who is not content with the harmony of his lyre or other frivolous musical instrument, but someone who, in the reality of his life, harmonizes his words and deeds in the Dorian mode, the only truly Greek mode, and not in the Ionian, and even less the Phrygian or Lydian modes. This voice delights me, and I receive his words with such passion that I appear to everyone to be a lover of discourse. But the speechifier, who does the opposite, annoys me, and the more so the better he seems to speak, and this makes me appear to be an enemy of discourse. As for Socrates, I am not yet familiar with his discourse, but I think I know his actions, and from this point of view I have found him worthy of the finest language and the greatest freedom of speech. So, if he possesses this quality, he has my goodwill. I will be happy to be examined by him, and I ask for nothing better than to learn according to Solon's precept, to which I wish to add just one word. Yes, I consent to learn in my old age, on condition that the teacher is an honorable man. Again, the quotation from Solon that Nicias gave earlier. I ask to be allowed this, the honesty of the teacher, so that I will not be accused of being refractory if I do not like what I hear. The fact that the teacher is young is still not well known, or that he has any other disadvantage of that kind, does not matter to me. So I invite you, Socrates, to teach me and examine me as you like, and I, in return, will teach you what I know. My feelings for you date from the day on which you shared my danger and gave full proof of your courage. So speak freely, without consideration for my age. We should read this reply with some care. The passage tends to be interpreted somewhat hastily, ascribing to Lash more or less the following intention. Lash would have said, I agree to Socrates questioning me. He is entitled to put his questions to me concerning courage. Why? Because I have been able to establish that Socrates himself was courageous at the Battle of Delium. He was alluding to this famous battle when he said, My feelings for you date from the day on which you shared my danger. This was the battle in which the Athenians were defeated, and Socrates displayed particular courage. The passage is usually interpreted by saying that Lash agrees to this discussion of courage, and to reply to Socrates' questions concerning courage, because he knows that Socrates was courageous at the Battle of Delium. Now, this interpretation does not keep to the text. First, as you will have been able to see, the question of courage has not yet arisen at this stage of the discussion. We are still dealing with the first question, which was, Lysimachus and Melesias have children, and are wondering whether they should entrust them to Stesislaus to learn armed fighting. Who could help them with this? We are still dealing with this question of the care to be given to children. The question of the nature of courage has not yet arisen. It comes in later. Second, if we look at the text, we see that not only is it not yet a question of courage in general, but Lash does not even refer exactly to Socrates' courage. He does refer to what took place at the Battle of Delium, but he does not employ the word that strictly signifies courage, which will come in later. He speaks much more generally of Socrates' virtue, worth, and arete. Courage is, of course, a part of virtue, but it is to this virtue, this worth in general, that Lasch refers. What actually does he say in all this? I do not think he says, I agree to being questioned by Socrates about courage because Socrates was courageous. In the first part of the passage, replying to a question, I am someone who does or does not love discourse, he says, I both do and do not love discourse. I don't really know much about the matter. Basically, I do not seek to divide discourses into good and bad ones in order to determine those I will welcome and those I will reject. I do not address myself so much to what discourses say as to whether or not there is harmony between what is said, the discourse itself, and the person who is saying it. When the life of the person speaking is in harmony with his discourse, when there is a symphony between someone's discourse and what he is, then I accept the discourse. When the relation between the way of living and the way of speaking is harmonious, I accept the discourse and am philogos, a friend of discourse. This is precisely the case with Socrates. Lasch does not say Socrates is qualified to talk about courage because he is courageous. Much more generally, he will accept everything that Socrates says freely. He, an old general back at home, will even agree to being tested and examined by Socrates, who is still a relatively young man. Why does he agree to all this? Precisely because there is this symphony, this harmony between what Socrates says, his way of saying things, and the way in which he lives. Socratic parrhesia as freedom to say what he likes is marked, authenticated by the sound of Socrates' life. So we do not go from Socrates' courage at the Battle of Delium to his qualification, his competence to talk about military courage. The line of argument goes from the harmony between Socrates' life and discourse to the practice of a true, free, and frank discourse. Free-spokenness hangs on the style of life. It is not courage in battle that authenticates the possibility of talking about courage. This passage is rather important and significant precisely for two things in which I am interested this year. First, the link between epimelia, care, and a certain modality of Socratic discourse. Socratic discourse is a discourse which can deal with men's care for themselves, inasmuch as Socratic parrhesia is precisely a discourse joined to and ordered by the principle, attend to yourself. When men are taking care of themselves and their children, Socrates is basically the true expert. Neither the political nor the technical form can answer to this fundamental need and care. Only Socratic concern, application, zeal, epimelia is able to answer to the care of men. Second, what will Socratic parrhesia speak about? It will not speak of competence. It will not speak of techne. It will speak of something else, of the mode of existence, the mode of life. The mode of life appears as the essential, fundamental correlative of the practice of truth-telling. Telling the truth in the realm of the care of men is to question their mode of life, to put this mode of life to the test and define what there is in it that may be ratified and recognized as good, and what, on the other hand, must be rejected and condemned. In this, you can see the organization of the fundamental series linking care, paresia, free-spokenness, and the ethical division between good and evil in the realm of bios existence. I think we have here the sketch, the already firm outline anyway of Socratic paresia, which is not the political paresia. It is privileged. Essential object is life and the mode of life. A word more on the end of the text. This is the third passage on which I would like to focus for a moment. I will be briefer here, questioning Lash and Nasius, who have agreed to play this paresiastic game, to find out whether they can give an account of the way in which they live. Socrates asked the question, what is courage? You are in actual fact courageous. You can give an account, give the logos of your behavior, of your way of living, and Lash first of all, and then Nasius supply themselves to this. Both of them fail. Lash, who is courageous, cannot account for, give the logos of his own behavior. His definition of courage fails because it is first of all too narrow and then too broad. Nicias is also put to the test. He is asked to give an account of his courage, and he cannot do it either, because he tries to account for it simply in terms of knowledge, ability, competence, and episteme. There is failure. These people who are courageous in reality and have had the courage to agree to the game of truth proposed by Socrates have been unable to tell the truth about courage. In this sense, there really is failure, and the dialogue is broken off with an acknowledgement. We have not discovered the true nature of courage, Socrates says. No, indeed, his partners in the discussion reply. But at the very point at which they acknowledge their inability to solve the question asked, namely, what is courage in its truth? What is the truth of courage? The dialogue is nevertheless not limited to this failure in its acknowledgement. Something has taken place in the dialogue which appears, I think, at the very end of the text, and prevents us from seeing a definitive impasse in all the obstacles encountered in the discussion and the effort to define the nature of courage. What has really happened, and that to which the dialogue leads, is not to be sought in the conclusion, but in the three conclusions, in the superimposition of these three conclusions in the dialogue. The first is the ironical conclusion by which Socrates' two discussion partners, Nicias and Lash, eminent and courageous politicians, rule themselves out, as it were, and exempt themselves. Nicias, who is more knowledgeable than Lash, has just failed. Lash makes fun of him and sends him back to the person who was and still is Nicias' usual teacher, Damon, a music teacher who was an important figure, both a music teacher and a political advisor, even in Pericles' time. Lash laughs and says to Nicias, "You should take some more lessons from Damon." So there is reference to the world of technique, of traditional mastery, in which a form of knowledge is passed on from master to disciple. Nicias thus referred back to his teacher because he has not even been able to define courage, accepts Lash's challenge, and states that he will in fact go to Damon to make good his inadequacies, since he has just discovered that he is unable to give a definition of courage. The first conclusion is that he rules himself out. The second conclusion is that when Lash and Nicias are about to leave the scene, they nevertheless give Lysimachus advice. It is in fact Lash who gives the advice. He says to him, "Since neither Nicias nor I have been able to define courage, with regard to your desire to know what to do for your children, Lysimachus, the only advice I can give you is to entrust them to Socrates." Why? So that he takes care of them, and by doing so improves them. We have here precisely the formula, you remember, which we found in the Apology, when Socrates recalled that the mission assigned to him by the gods was to take care of the citizens of the state, and even of any man in the street, and to improve them. And because this really is the divine mission he has been given, and to which he refers in the Apology, it would indeed be ungracious to refuse it here. He accepts it, in fact, or at any rate he refuses to shirk the task which Lysimachus asks him to undertake. He says, it would be wrong to refuse one's aid to anyone who wants to improve himself. So Socrates is about to become responsible for the education of Lysimachus' children. He is the person to whom this epimelia is entrusted, this care that Lysimachus and Nicias was so concerned about at the start of the dialogue. But Socrates has no sooner said that he cannot refuse than he makes the objection, both to himself and to the others, that basically, since he was no more able to define courage than were Nicias and Lash, then he is not really capable of taking care of others. And since it has been a general failure, no one has been able to arrive at a definition. We must now look for a teacher, and, he adds, regardless of expense and without shame at returning to school. We have the impression that at this point, Socrates is doing the same as Nicias when the latter said, "As for me, it's very simple. I have not managed to find a definition of courage, so I am returning to my school teacher. Old as I may be, I'm going to start learning again. I will go back to that scene of technical teaching and tradition. I shall speak to my teacher so that he may teach me what I need." Socrates seems to be doing this, but one phrase at least should alert us. This is when he says, "Regardless of the expense, let's seek out new teachers. Given, as you know, what Socrates is always saying with regard to those teachers who charge for their lessons. It is clear that this can only be an ironic conclusion. In fact, it is quite evident that the school teacher to whom one should turn, since one has not arrived at the definition of courage, is not one who charges like Damon or Stesislaus. This teacher, to whom everyone should listen, since no one has arrived at the definition of courage, is of course Logos itself, the discourse which will give access to the truth. And everyone should submit to it, young people of course, but also their parents, and Socrates as well. This is why Socrates ends one of his last interventions, just after having referred to the need to disregard the expense and return to school, saying, "You will no doubt laugh seeing me at school, but let's ignore those mockers and take care of both yourselves and these young people. Let us take care both of ourselves and the young people. Taking care of self and of the children is what is in fact at the heart of the Socratic project, the aim of his parrhesiastic practice. It is clear that Socrates is thus in the same situation as the others. Since the true teacher is not the school teacher, but Logos, Socrates must listen to it like the others, and he must take care of himself and of others at the same time. You see, however, that he inevitably occupies a privileged position in listening to the teacher that he needs. He is the person who guides. He constantly recalls that one must take care of oneself, and that in order to do this, one must listen to the Logos, if not Socrates himself, so that Socrates rejects the role of teacher in the sense of a teacher of techne who can pass on a teaching to his students. He does not want to put himself in this position and is, from the point of view, in exactly the same situation as the others. He will have to take care of himself by listening to the language of mastery that comes from the Logos itself. However, in this sort of equality, which is not just apparent, but real equality, which means that everyone in the Socratic community will have to take care of self and, if they are capable of doing so, take care of others. Socrates nevertheless occupies a position unlike that of the others. He is the person who guides the others towards the care of themselves, and maybe towards the possibility of taking care of others. Certainly, Socrates will put himself in the hands of the missing teacher. But at the same time, while putting himself in the hands of the missing teacher, the Logos, he is the one who guides others on the way of the Logos. Everyone understands this so well. It is so clearly the lesson of the dialogue that when Socrates has just said, ironically, "So let's go to school, and let those who will mock us laugh," Lysimachus, who organized the whole dialogue, who raised the question, and who was always in search of someone to take care of his children, says, "I like your discourse, Socrates, and as the oldest, I want to be the most willing to study with these children. But I ask you this, come to my house tomorrow morning without fail to talk again about this project. For the moment, let us part. So, just after Socrates has said that, like them, he is completely ignorant and that they all need a teacher, Lysimachus, hearing this, hears something else. He hears that Socrates, and only Socrates, is the teacher of this way, leading to the true teacher. And that is why, instead of seeking out the expensive teacher Socrates referred to ironically, Lysimachus simply says to Socrates, "Come to my house then." It is the pact of Epimeleia that now appears. You will take care of my children, and you will take care not only of them, but of me too, according to the principle evoked at the start of the dialogue when he said that one must question the way in which one lives, even when one is old, and throughout one's life. One's existence, the form of one's style of existence, must be constantly subject to the basanos, touchstone. It is as basanos as the person who makes each person justify his life, all his life, and throughout his life, that Socrates is called upon for the children of Lysimachus and for Lysimachus himself. Furthermore, Socrates accepts this mission. His last word is, "I will not fail, Lysimachus. I will come to your house tomorrow to guide you and your children on the way of the care of self and of listening to the Logos. I will be at your house tomorrow, if it pleases the gods." This is an entirely banal and ritual expression, but nevertheless, it should be understood at two levels, as is often the case with ritual expressions in Plato. We should recall that in actual fact, this is, explicitly, what the god wanted. More than a formula, it is the reminder of what the god wanted when, you recall in the Apology, he showed Socrates that he had to go among the people and ask them to account for the way in which they live, and in this way teach them to take care of themselves. There you are. So, as promised, this week I have finished with Socrates. As a philosophy professor, one really must have lectured on Socrates and the death of Socrates at least once in one's life. It's done. Salvate animam meam. Next week, as promised, we will talk about the Cynics. That's the end of Lecture 4 of the Courage of Freedom lectures by Michel Foucault at the College of France, 1983-84.